Pickle, let's go to the hotline. We are continuing our series of State of the Program addresses, looking at the 12 FBS teams across the state of Texas. We have landed in the 806. Let's go up to Lubbock to talk with the man up there at the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal. We're joined by Carlos Silva, Jr. Carlos, how are you?
Fine, and you, Tip? How are you?
Doing excellent. Appreciate you hopping on with us. I know you're a busy man this time of year.
I think we all are.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to be busy this time, as we all know what happened last year. So I think it's nice to just kind of have a sort of normalcy.
Absolutely true. All right. I want to ask you, we're here talking a little bit about Texas Tech Red Raiders. This is a program that obviously entering its third year under Matt Wells, I think is under some pressure to win. Last year at 4-6 in a weird fits and starts season, take whatever you want from 2020. But, they go into this year, I think, with expectations to go out there and win some games. Apologies for the purposefully vague question, but when you take a look at what's happening out there in Lubbock, what do you think is the state of the program out there at Texas Tech?
I think it's exactly what you just laid out there, Trevor. After back-to-back 4-win seasons, there's a little bit of pressure on Matt Wells, but I think the one thing that everyone can agree on, whether it's nationals, even though some are starting to kind of understand it, is they've really worked the transfer portal. They've been able to shore up some of the deficiencies they had where in the two depth, they may have not had all that depth that you were looking for when he initially got here after replacing Cliff Kingsbury. So I think the biggest thing, obviously, as you guys know, last year was letting go David Yost, their offensive coordinator, getting Sonny Cumbie in, and just getting a fresh new start on the offensive end, which is something that I think that's kind of foreign to Texas Tech fans, is the fact that your defense is going to probably be better than your offense, at least starting off, although Tyler Shuck should hopefully help you a little bit in terms of throwing the football a little bit farther down the field than maybe you had in previous years with David Yost and Sonny Cumbie wanting to be a little bit more aggressive. And he says it's a version of the air raid, but it's kind of his little take on it. I think that's something to look forward to. But I think when you look at Texas Tech with all the guys that they brought in, the TJ Storman from TCU to shore up the offensive line, which has got a bunch of guys that have experience, I think that's going to be really the biggest thing to watch. Is in this offense for Texas Tech really step up and score points, where the defense last year really showed that it was able to turn the ball over, get it to the offense, but they weren't able to take advantage of that last year.
I think that in a year where there's not a ton of known commodities out there at the quarterback spot across the state of Texas, Tech's in an interesting position in the sense that they have a new quarterback in Tyler Shuck, but he is a transfer and a highly touted transfer. But you talk with Oregon fans, and they are they don't necessarily know what to think of him. When you're out there at camp, you're out there at practice, you're around the program, what is the vibe right now around Tyler Shuck? Because it does feel like a lot of the hopes of Texas Tech kind of taking the next step depend on him. What is the vibe right now around him leading that offense?
I think the one thing you can take away is that now there's a little bit of competition at the quarterback position, because I know everyone's going to be focused on Tyler Shuck, but then you have your leading guy that threw the football last year in Henry Colombi. He was very good last year. Alan Bowman, of course, didn't play too much last year due to injuries. He transferred to Michigan, but there's a lot of competition. And I think Tyler Shuck is certainly someone that is going to embrace that. He started 7 games at Oregon on their way to obviously some postseason accolades as well. And I think the only reason he transferred was because Anthony Brown, who replaced him at certain times throughout the season for the Ducks last year, was probably the reason he decided to transfer. And obviously it was a huge coup for Tech, because you're going to get a guy that can throw the ball downfield, has a little bit of a dual threat ability, which is something that you were missing a little bit maybe with Alan Bowman, and maybe Cliff Kingsbury with his offensive mind and genius, if you will, was able to hide it, so to speak, to where he was able to get a little bit quicker passes. And maybe now I think that's going to be really the key with Tyler Shuck. Yes, I think you're going to see a true quarterback. When you look at him, you think quarterback. I think that's the best way. Some people around the program have kind of said it's just he looks like a quarterback. And I know it sounds really dumb, but it's just he throws like a quarterback. He looks like a quarterback. But I think the important thing is, can you protect that quarterback? Because that's something that hasn't happened the last couple of years. You look at Henry Colombi, he was a guy that ran the football. Sometimes he had to lead the team in rushing. in certain games because he was running for his life, as you guys kind of saw Texas Tech play last year. And I think that's something that if you can shore that up, you have plenty of playmakers to throw the ball to, including Kalen Geiger from Troy, a transfer that they just got recently, to provide more depth for the wide receiver core, which hopefully will have Eric Izukanma return in the fall after he broke his arm in two places during the spring.
Well, and you mentioned we're talking Carlos Silva Jr. Of the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal here on Texas football today. Get involved in the conversation, hashtag TF today. You mentioned the weapons that they're going to have. Not only the receivers, you mentioned the transfer in Geiger, but Azukanma and guys like McLean Mannix and stuff like that. My question, and then you add in like the running back situation, Sir Roderick Thompson, is this the most complete set of skill position guys that Matt Wells has had since he arrived?
I think it's fair to say because, as I mentioned before, he knew that there were some holes and some deficiency in the depth chart. And I think they did a good job of finding guys in the transfer portal that, one, kind of got them old, which is something that Tim Tadlock likes to do every once in a while, or Chris Beard previously when he was at Texas Tech used to do, by getting the transfer portal, getting some guys that have experience and were able to, not necessarily need a year or two to wait for them to develop. They already knew what they had. They knew the resume. The resume was their tape. So I'm sure that's what they saw with Kalen Geiger. They knew he was a guy that could bring in some experience, some leadership, and not only that, but he was a pretty darn good player. An all Sun Belt player, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's something that you can look at. But the thing is like I said, Tepper, if you're not able to block for Tyler Shuck or create those running lanes for Sir Roderick Thompson, if he's able to come back after that shoulder surgery that he had in the spring, although you do have some other guys in Taj Brooks and Xavier White and all these other guys at the running back position. Yes, to your point, they do have a lot more depth. They do have a lot more playmakers, but can you block for them or can you create those running lanes? I think that's going to be the key for the offense this year for Texas Tech.
Nobody ever talks about Texas Tech's defense, which is a shame because, I don't know, I sit here and Keith Patterson, the defense coordinator, I think is a guy who flies under people's radar. I think that they have pretty quietly improved. I'm not saying that this is one of the best defenses in the country or anything like that, but it does look like they've taken steps forward. And it seems like that could continue. That trajectory could continue into 2021. Do you get the feeling that Tech's defense could take that next step and become a legit asset as opposed to just maybe not the biggest liability that it has been in the past?
I would almost argue to say that they were not a liability last year. They created turnovers. They made goal line stops. I think the most memorable one was Colin Schooler almost decleating the Baylor quarterback at the goal line last year, and just showing, okay, this is why Texas Tech went after Colin Schooler, and kind of showed his talent. And he returns, by the way, along with Rico Jeffers, Jacob Morgenstern, and 5 of the top 8 tacklers last year, if I'm not mistaken, were linebackers. So I think that's going to be something that you can look at as something that Keith Patterson's going to really enjoy, is the fact that all of his linebackers already know his system. They already know how to play. They're going to make open field tackles. They have a pretty decent secondary with DeMarcus Fields returning and some of the other transfers that I was talking to you about. I know Adrian Fry returns. He was with Texas Tech. But then you look at a Rashad Williams from UCLA, Eric Monroe, LSU. He returns for a second year. He's looking to play a lot better. But the guy that everyone is really excited about is Marquise Waters out of Duke. Didn't play that much there, but it seems like everyone in the program is really talking about how much he could make a difference, including Matt Wells. And I think that's the name that you're going to be hearing in the fall. And if he does make a big difference, that's going to be huge for Texas Tech. But just like on offense, where a battle will be won with the trenches, I think the trenches will be where Texas Tech will know if their defense is good or not. Because, yes, they do return some guys on the defensive line, like a Tony Bradford, Jalen Hutchings, and Tyree Wilson. But after that, you're kind of like what I was talking about with offense. The depth chart, the depth, it's not as where you'd like it on the defensive line. But the top 3, like I said, the Jalen Hutchings, Tony Bradford, the Tyree Wilson, hopefully with a true year of off-season work instead of just getting here right before August practices, I think that should help them. Now, whether or not they can kind of stay on the field as long as they can, I know Keith Patterson likes to have a nice rotation. That will be seen in the fall, but I think that's going to be the one part of the defense that if you're a Tech fan, you can kind of watch, and if that succeeds, that means your defense is going to be pretty good.
Finally, with Carlos Silva of the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal here. This is year 3 for Matt Wells, and obviously 2020, it's hard to count that as a full year. It was such a strange situation. Most places will tell you that if you're not showing progress by year 3, then you're on the hot seat. Not asking to tell me whether or not Matt Wells' job is in jeopardy. What I will ask though is what would constitute success for Texas Tech? I don't think anybody's expecting them to go out there and win a national championship this year. But what would constitute success for Texas Tech in 2021?
Well, certainly more than 4 wins, in a joking manner, obviously. But I think 6 to 7 would probably answer your question. 6 to 7 wins, and not only that, but get to a bowl game, because that's essentially what you're looking for. Initially, when he was hired, Kirby Hope had said that he wanted an elite coach to kind of lead this program, and obviously maybe the wording is probably still correct in his mind. But the thing is after 2 years, if you only have 8 wins, not necessarily the type of coach that you're looking for. But the thing is he has been building this team to this 3rd year. And like I said, there's a lot of talent on this team, but can they put it all together? And I think that's going to be the general storyline here for Texas Tech is, yes, they've struggled the first 2 years, but they've been building. They finally got a new offensive coordinator. They got the quarterback that they feel that can lead them to the promised land in terms of what they want to do on the offensive side of the ball. The defense seems to be really good with Keith Patterson in his 3rd year with the program here. So I think the product is there. It's just, will the results show? And I think that's going to be what, makes the hot seats or the seat get a little bit warmer for Matt Wells throughout the fall. But certainly the non-conference looks pretty good for Texas Tech as they start with Houston. But I think Big 12 is really where he has to show some progress, because you've only won 5 games in the Big 12 in those first 2 years. You certainly have to at least try to get yourself a winning record in the Big 12, or at least 500. And I think that's showing progress for Texas Tech and Matt Wells.
He's Carlos Silva Jr. He's the sports editor there at the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal. Follow him on Twitter at CMSilva Jr. Carlos, appreciate your time, my man. And I guess we'll probably see you next week in Arlington. Is that correct?
That would be correct. I will actually be Big 12 Media Day probably around 5 or 6 tomorrow with Don Williams. So if you guys want to chat with good old Don, the encyclopedia of Lubbock. I know you like to joke and call me the king. Don is technically the encyclopedia of Lubbock. So.
Well, looking forward to seeing you guys. Appreciate your time, my man.
Yes, sir.
There he goes. Carlos Silva Jr. of the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal joining us here on Texas Football Today. I know Shahan Jayaraja, our college football insider, is bullish on Tech.
Yeah.
And and he's been, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's basically said on paper, he's like, I'm not, on paper is different than on the field. Absolutely.
Right.
Because on paper, there's a lot to like about Tech.
Yeah.
In 2021.
If they can get that quarterback position figured out,
it's quarterback.
Click.
He mentioned it's quarterback, it's offensive line. I have concern. He mentioned the defensive line. I have concern about defensive line too. But those are the 3 spots. If they can just be pretty good there, I mean, there's no reason that they can't get into that kind of, let's say, 2nd tier of the Big 12.
Right, yeah.
Behind the Oklahomas and the Iowa States.
I don't think they're competing for a Big 12
championship,
but I don't think it's too much to ask for them to be in the top half.
No, but I think they could realistically go like 5-4, 6-3 in conference. You know what I mean? Like top end 6-3 would be really, really good.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll see. We appreciate Carlos Silva Jr. of the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal hopping on with us.